So let's talk about now. The reason I have you on is because you were, after I pioneered the Syria gas attack stories, you jumped on my coattails.
True. That's true.
And then you made it your thing, and I willingly gave it to you because nobody gives me any credibility, so I have to give it to someone who has it. So,
thank you, Jimmy. Thank you.
So you have, and you've you won the I.F. Stone Award for your meticulous debunking of the Russiagate conspiracy theory, and you should win an award for the work you've done on Syria. And you've proven that the narrative, the imperialistic narrative around the Syria gas attacks was phony, and that there have been OPCW whistleblowers to come out and reveal that the investigation, the truth about the investigation, which that there wasn't a gas, was suppressed by the OPCW. You've proven that through your reporting, and no one anywhere in journalism has written an article to debunk anything you've written. You've written at least 10 or 11 articles about Syria, correct?
12 now, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So now 12, and nobody has written an article to debunk you. That's nobody at the Washington Post, New York Times, is certainly not The Intercept, who won't touch this story with a 10-foot pole. But Ryan Grim will go on Twitter to try to discredit your reporting in a really bogus way, but when asked to produce work on it, he won't do it or assign someone to do it. So that's, again, The Intercept running interference for the establishment.
The Intercept did promote the pro-war line when this alleged attack in Douma happened. They published multiple articles arguing that the Trump administration was correct in accusing Syria of a chlorine attack. Since the whistleblowers came out showing all that to be false, they haven't revisited the issue. They haven't even acknowledged the whistleblower's existence. Ryan Graham suggested to me on Twitter that he was going to look into it. So, I hope he follows through. I do, because this story deserves coverage. And if you make a mistake, you can always make up for it by actually covering the evidence that you overlooked the first time. And the evidence now comes from the actual people who investigated this alleged attack. And it never fails to blow my mind how resoundingly the story has been ignored by not just the mainstream media, but progressive media as well, like The Intercept and Democracy Now!
Yes, unbelievably ignored. But it has not been ignored here at the Jimmy Dore Show, or the BBC hasn't ignored it either, but they've told the wrong story. So it says BBC admits Syria gas attack report had serious flaws in Victory for Truth after complaint by Peter Hitchens, which turns out Christopher Hitchens' brother, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, by the way, serious flaws is a very nice way of saying our story was not true. That's another way to say it. Hey, Mom and Dad, when I said I did my homework, that statement had some serious flaws in it. My bad. So that's the equivalent. So let's just look at the story. The BBC has admitted that a Radio 4 documentary on an alleged chemical weapons attack in Syria contained serious inaccuracies, as opposed to the non-serious inaccuracies. The corporation's executive complaints unit, it's the ECU, upheld a protest from the Daily Mail on last November's broadcast of May Day, the canister on the bed. Adjudicators, I love this. Adjudicators agreed that the program failed to meet the corporation's editorial standards for accuracy by reporting false claims. They have standards at the BBC. They have standards. That's a pretty solid standard to have, by the way. Standard. We have a standard. We don't report false claims. That's a standard. It's a pretty basic standard. Okay. The program dealt with an attack at Douma in 2018 and included an account of the role later played by Alex, that's in quotes, Alex, a former inspector with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the poison gas watchdog. Okay, so the ECU delivered its findings that the BBC was wrong to insinuate Alex, a highly qualified and apolitical scientist, apolitical, not political, apolitical. So this guy, Alex, who was a scientist working at the OPCW, a highly qualified and apolitical scientist, was motivated to go to the public about his doubts over the attack by the prospect of $100,000 reward from the whistleblowing website WikiLeaks. So the BBC said that this guy Alex, this scientist who worked for the OPCW, who expressed his concerns, they said he was doing that because he was enticed by $100,000 reward, but no such reward was ever paid. That was all. So that was false. That was made up by the BBC. And that seems like something, I don't know, if I worked at the BBC and I was going to say that on a BBC platform, I would, I don't know, fact check it. Maybe call WikiLeaks, ask them, did you ever pay this guy? Just say, that's all you have to do. They didn't do the bare minimum. Welcoming the ruling, Peter Hitchens, welcoming the ruling. By the way, who's doing this investigation? Is it the same people who did the ivermectin story for Rolling Stone? Here we go. Welcoming the ruling, Peter Hitchens said, "This is a major victory for the truth. It's astonishingly rare for the BBC to rule against itself." Yes, it is. So just to let you know, the WikiLeaks has never had to retract a story. Guess who has? The BBC retracting their story about WikiLeaks. Isn't that ironic? But Julian Assange is the guy being prosecuted. He's in prison. Far from seeking rewards, they realized that their actions would damage their careers, but went ahead anyway. Can't miss out on a good headline, truth be damned. Am I right? And I just want to remind people that this is how the BBC covers Syria. Now, this was a couple of years ago. This guy, I'm pretty sure this guy was the former head of the British Navy. I could be wrong about that, but he's an ex-top military guy, and that's why they're bringing him on. They're bringing him on because he's an ex-top guy and an expert, and so they bring this guy on, and watch this.
Do you think anything, what we've heard from either Sergei Lavrov or indeed the Russian ambassador, has made it more difficult for the UK to launch any kind of attack without putting it to Parliament?
Yeah, I think quite apart from all that, the debate that seems to be missing from this is, and this was actually mentioned by the ambassador, was what possible motive might have triggered Syria to launch a chemical attack at this time in this place. The Syrians are winning. Don't take my word for it. Take the American military's word for it. General Virgil, the head of CENTCOM, he said to Congress the other day, Assad has won this war, and we need to face that. So, and then you got last week the statement by Trump, or the tweet by Trump, that America had finished with ISIL and we were going to pull out soon, very soon. And then suddenly you get...
Okay, I'm very sorry. You've been very patient waiting for us, but we do need to leave it there. I'm very sorry. Thank you very much indeed.
So now that's not the BBC, that's Sky News, but that's how this story has been treated. If you're not saying the right narrative, they're going to censor you immediately, and that's exactly what happened. And so let me just finish this. Jonathan Cook tweeted out, "Remember how The Guardian and others gushed over Radio 4's ludicrously propagandist program on the Syrian gas attack? Well, the BBC's been forced to admit it was full of flaws that were all too obvious at the time of the broadcast. Lots of other flaws are still being glossed over." Is this story true? It might be. It has flaws. Okay. Hey, BBC, guess what? I'm starting for the Los Angeles Lakers next week. It might be flawed, but I don't know. That's a story I'm putting out there. It might be flawed. Not the BBC, which has a long history of perverted war propaganda and flat-out lying about events in Syria, inventing things again? Flaws make it sound like an innocent mistake, not the pack of lies that it was, which was obvious to anyone with half a brain. They never let the truth get in the way of a lie at the BBC. The BBC was more than aware of the nature of what they were broadcasting. As with all propaganda, the damage is already done by the time some measly judgment or apology arrives. So let me bring in Aaron Mate. Aaron, what do you make of BBC retracting their complete pack of lies bogus story that they broadcast, and why'd they do it?
It's an example of what we were talking about a bit before, which is that people who try to cover this story, the OPCW whistleblower scandal, if you want to try to promote the official line, then you cannot engage with the facts seriously, because the facts are just too damning. The original team went to Syria. They wrote a report. That report said there was no evidence of a chemical attack in Syria. That would have undermined the claims of the US and UK and France, who bombed Syria, based on that allegation. And that report was censored. It was not only censored, but it was doctored. So people above the inspectors tried to basically add conclusions that were just completely bogus, basically trying to say that they had evidence of a chemical attack that could be pinned on Syria. So that led to this big internal dispute, and it resulted in basically the original inspectors being sidelined and the OPCW publicly putting out this bogus report. And we know about it because we've got a series of leaks from inside that are just overwhelmingly damning. They show what a serious fraud took place to advance the desired narrative. So there's so much documentation of this, and anybody who wants to look away from it can't engage with it. So that's why this BBC podcast engaged in a series of smears and innuendo about the whistleblowers, including that one of them might have been motivated by money to get paid by WikiLeaks. And as you said, if you're going to air that claim, the most minimal thing you should do is just ask WikiLeaks. But they didn't do that because they can't, because WikiLeaks would have told them the truth. And these people aren't interested in the truth. And the reason they're not is because the BBC, it's an arm of the British state, and Britain played a major role in the dirty war on Syria. Millions of dollars went into weapons, into propaganda, basically trying to paint all these sectarian death squads that the U.S. was arming and Saudi Arabia was arming and Qatar was arming, trying to paint them as moderate rebels. And Britain was hugely involved in that propaganda effort to try to make this war look like something that the people in the West should support. And so when this Syria scandal at WCW comes along, it's so damning to the narrative, because this allegation that Assad is this genocidal dictator who wants to gas his own people, even at the most strategically awful times for him, is so important to this narrative that keeps the dirty war going. So when this story came out showing that, one of these chemical attacks, the basis for it was flawed, and then that there was this massive effort to cover it up, that's hugely damning for the entire dirty war narrative. So this BBC podcast is this multi-part attempt to basically whitewash the OPCW scandal and also whitewash the White Helmets, which is this supposed aid group that really is just a propaganda operation to manufacture consent in the West for the dirty war. And the White Helmets, in reality, while posing as an aid group, were basically working alongside sectarian fanatics like Al-Qaeda and like Jaish al-Islam, which is the death squad that controlled Duma when this chemical attack was staged. And amazingly, this BBC podcast is such a work of propaganda that it doesn't even mention the reporting of a BBC reporter who punctured a very big hole in the Duma narrative. This guy, Riyam Dalati, did a long investigation, and he found that a hospital scene in Duma that was put out to promote this idea that Syria had committed a chemical attack there, he reported that scene was staged, and it was staged with the involvement of the White Helmets, this UK, US funded group. And this BBC podcast, Mayday, didn't even mention their own reporters reporting, because they can't, because it undermines their desired narrative. So that's an example of how there are so many more inaccuracies and flaws with this program that this complaint didn't even address. And I've written about it before at the Gray Zone. There's just so many omissions that they made because their purpose was not to do a serious podcast. It was to manufacture consent.
So what would make the BBC admit this? No one else has admitted. Everybody makes up lies about Russia, Trump, Russiagate, Syria, the gas attacks. Hillary Clinton called a sitting member of Congress a Russian asset and someone currently serving in the Syrian war. I mean, that's what, and no one pays a price for any of that. So why would the BBC decide to own up to this?
Well, they have this review board. I don't know how independent it is, but this complaint was pretty narrow. So if I had written this complaint, I would have put in so many more other inaccuracies and falsehoods that they put out. It was just like, it's a huge work of propaganda that I have an article at the Gray Zone that debunks it. And so I think possibly they looked at this and said, all right, well, we can get away with just owning up to this because maybe we can avoid owning up to all the other problems in our podcast. That's one theory I have. Another theory is that maybe some people there actually have some independence. And also in the UK, because this came from Peter Hitchens, who's like a journalist at a prominent outlet, the Daily Mail. And in the UK, they do have harsher libel laws. So maybe because Hitchens is a prominent journalist and he's a UK citizen, maybe they took it a bit more seriously and were even scared by it. But honestly, this admission on their part is like way too narrow. There's so much more that they have to own up to.
So, will now the people involved in producing this, they're going to be driven out of journalism, right? Or they'll probably get a promotion. What do you think's going to happen?
They'll get a whole. I'm sure they'll be fine. And you know how corrupt this podcast was. One of their researchers was a guy who worked for something called ARC. And ARC is basically, it's a British contractor that profits off of British foreign policy, founded by a guy with deep ties to the British deep state. And ARC founded the White Helmets. Oh. And ARC was also deeply and branded. It came up with the name and everything. There's this, the White Helmets are branded as a Syrian group. No, they were founded in Turkey by British by British citizens, basically, and British contractors. And ARC, funded the White Helmets, branded them, came up with the name, all this stuff. And so one of their researchers worked for the organization that founded the White Helmets, which is the topic of their podcast. And when I wrote to the host about this, and I wrote to the BBC, they said basically that the researcher played a minimal role. He didn't play that big a role in the thing. So it's just corrupt front to back. And because this program, it's a part of the state apparatus that is there to put out propaganda, to manufacture consent. And so, but this is, although it's narrow, it's a rare case of some accountability for propaganda.
I'm at, what's the word, gobsmacked that the BBC decided to do the right thing, and it even in this narrow, limited way. Yeah. But again, the damage has already been done because everyone has already internalized the narrative that Assad was gassing his own people. Tulsi Gabbard is a traitor to our country, working for Donald Trump, and everybody else who says anything different is a conspiracy theorist. In fact, if you go to Wikipedia, they still have an entry at Wikipedia, which is because Wikipedia is in cahoots with the intelligence community, as we know, and they're not going to let anybody who tells the truth about war have a clean Wikipedia page. So Wikipedia has still in there an entry from CNN Business, which called me a conspiracy theorist because I denied the gas attacks as false flags in Syria. Well, they were. And we've proven that now, and they won't let me take that out of there or add your reporting that debunks that stupid thing said about me. They won't let me add it. So again, Wikipedia, just another outlet of censorship of the establishment of the military-industrial complex and the intelligence community. That's what Wikipedia is, even though it's supposed to be funded just by regular people. Again, somehow the people who run it end up getting in bed with the CIA, MI6, and the military-industrial complex and practice censorship against real journalism. That's what Wikipedia does. Do you have a Wikipedia page?
I do, and I've seen some of the familiar people who doctor your page trying to doctor mine as well, and that's just how it goes. It's like, and there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. In some ways, it'd be better not to have a Wikipedia page.
I would like
not having one would be more accurate than having one if you're letting people basically slander you in your Wikipedia page. But look, on this whole thing, Jimmy, think about what this whole experience must be like for the whistleblowers. These people gave a huge part of their careers to a really important organization. Together, they've been with the OPCW for more than 20 years. They're so experienced that both of them actually worked at the OPCW from its inception, and they came back for a second tour because they were asked to, because they were so skilled and experienced. So they challenged this blatant cover-up that they're in an investigation that they're on. And what does the media do? It's not, okay, fine. Like, we expect the US, the UK, France to try to attack them, slander them, What does the media do? The Guardian says that all this thing is just a Russian-led disinformation campaign. That's the Guardian, the liberal Guardian.
Yes.
The BBC puts out this hit piece of a podcast that completely distorts their positions, that has all this cheap innuendo about them, like they were motivated by money, and that just that spreads all these false claims about them and the investigation. And then you have the rest of the media, which simply just ignores the story because, again, for them to engage with the story would mean to look at the facts of the story, and the facts are just too damning for the pro-war narrative. So the media just completely ignores these brave people. And meanwhile, the media, including The Intercept, go around talking about how much they love whistleblowers. We all champion whistleblowers. You know, everyone loves whistleblowers. These guys challenged this major pro-war deception. And not just that, also exposed a cover-up in the interests of the world's most powerful states, the US, UK, France, at the OPCW, the world's top chemical weapons watchdog. And the reaction is either slander from places like the BBC, or it's silence. And not just silence from the New York Times or the Washington Post, but silence from The Intercept, silence from Democracy Now! I've never seen anything like it in my life. And it means that people like us, we get a wide open lane to cover this incredible story. I mean, it's not often you have a deception of this level exposed by people on the inside and with documents, which is like the lifeblood of journalism. This is what we all want. And it's all there. And there's so much rich material that basically only outlets like the Gray Zone and you and a few others have explored. And the cover up is ongoing. I mean, last time we covered this, we talked about how the OPCW Director General, Fernando Arias, he's going before the UN Security Council. He's just telling blatant lies, demonstrable falsehoods that are so easily proven. And he's changing his story. At one point he's saying, I don't know why there was an issue. I don't know. But then he's saying, but you know, they're wrong. Like the whistleblowers are wrong. And then he's saying the matter is closed as far as I'm concerned. And then he's saying, I don't have the authority to look at it. So it's this ongoing clown show, and the rest of the media abets it by just willfully looking away, or in the case of the BBC, or the middle-aged McCarthyites, aka TYT, trying to do laughable propaganda to whitewash it. But you know, as we see every time, it always blows up because this story is just so explosive and the facts are just so damning.
So, Aaron, I don't understand. I come from comedy, and so I don't understand journalism. In fact, this weekend I'll be doing stand-up comedy with my good buddy Jay Leno, or you say Leno, over at the Flappers Comedy Club, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
And some other friends.
It's going to be interesting. Now, I come from comedy, and I don't understand if you're in journalism, why would you be afraid to tell the story that you're telling? Why don't they all cover it?
Well, there's careerism. You just internalize the awareness that if you go there, if you touch certain third rails, like the Syria dirty war, around which there's been so much propaganda, because we're talking about, and we'll probably talk about this in the next segment. We're talking about one of the most expensive covert operations in CIA history. Billions of dollars went into destroying Syria, and there was so much propaganda deployed to whitewash that. And people just internalize when these things are happening that, you know, if you cross the red line, you're going to get smeared as an Assadist and a dictator apologist and all the usual McCarthyite tools that are used to silence people. And so that's powerful. People want to get jobs in the future, and they just know where to go. And it's amazing. It speaks to how propagandized we are as a society, that it's not just the mainstream media doing this, because that's been going on for a long time, but now it extends to progressive media, people who identify as leftists, not just ignoring the story, but in some cases attacking us for covering it and trying to like whitewash the official line. So I think it's because we live in a heavily propagandized society where there are incentives for towing the line, and there's only a few people who are willing to not care about that stuff and speak the truth no matter what. And I'm happy to be in that group. I think, you know, I think we're in that group. Yeah.
I think we are the group. I don't think there's. Is there anybody else in that group besides us? I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't seen them. And so, speaking of Democracy Now, so a guy named Paul Saravel, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, he called into the Democracy Now. I'm pretty sure that was the guy he calls into Democracy Now, or this show who's interviewing Amy Goodman, not Democracy Now, a show that's interviewing her. and asked the question, hey, why don't you have Aaron Mate on? And here's what she says.
Kick it off with Paul Survels, who is the chair of South Mountain Peace Action. He asks, and sort of tying into Democracy Now!, he says, Amy, a former Democracy Now! Producer, Aaron Mate, an anti-war journalist who writes for The Nation and produces the show Pushback, has broken many stories based on testimony by whistleblowers and a former director of the OPCW, which, for those who aren't aware, is the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, that raised serious doubts about allegations of chemical weapons used by the Syrian government. When do you plan on inviting Aaron on the air to discuss his reporting on the issue, or further discussing that issue on your show?
I think that is a critical issue, is, all the period in Syria, what exactly took place. We have looked at that issue before and may well continue to do so. Right now, focusing on what's happening in this country and what's happening around the world around militarism. But, it's an important point, and it's important to hear the voices of everyone on this issue, especially those directly involved.
So, no. So that was a long way for Amy Goodman to say, no, I'm not having former producer Aaron Mate on my show to talk about this. In fact, I'm not going to have on anybody like Aaron Mate to talk about this. And she said it's really important, but she means it's really important to get people like me to ignore this story or to report it incorrectly. That's what's really important. And because she's not doing anything important when it comes to Syria. What, do you want to say anything?
Well, it's sad. I mean, I worked there for a decade, and Amy Goodman was one of my heroes. I mean, she is a legend in journalism. Nothing can take away all that she's done for journalism. She has an incredible record of reporting that really inspired me and inspired many others. But, it's no secret. I've been critical of the show since I left. I think on Syria and Russiagate, they really dropped the ball. They basically did the exact opposite of what the show is for, which is to, the slogan of the show is breaking the sound barrier and being the exception to the rulers. Well, in the case of Russiagate and Syria and a few other issues too, they carried the line of the rulers, and it's sad. And look, there's so many people who are covering this story that there's no excuse for not covering it, even if you wouldn't want to bring me on. There's plenty of people who come on to talk about it. It's I feel sad for Democracy Now! And just for lefty media in general that we've devolved to a place where a story like this gets so resoundingly ignored. And you see the lengths that she goes to there to try to justify ignoring it. And she talks about how we've covered this before. The only time they've covered this was back when the first OPCW leaks came out in 2019. So more than 2 years ago, in June 2019 or something like that. So more than 2 years ago. And their guest who they brought on was this guy named Brian Whitaker, who's a pro-war propagandist. He's a dirty war whitewasher. And they brought him on, and he basically minimized the importance of these leaks. And since then, even more leaks have come out, even actually way more explosive leaks have come out, because at the time, there was actually just one leak. There was the engineering report written by Ian Henderson that focused on the cylinders. But since then, we've gotten this trove of more leaks from WikiLeaks, which show the original report and how that report was censored and all this other damning material. And Democracy Now! Has completely ignored it. So when she says we've looked at this before, the way they looked at it was by bringing on a pro-war propagandist to whitewash it. And this guy is such a pro-war propagandist that about a year or so later, he doxed one of the whistleblowers. He revealed his name. So that's that's the caliber of Democracy Now!'s guest. And I don't just want to pick on Democracy Now!, but to me, it's the fact that such an important show and such a big show, which is genuinely independent, it can do what it wants, it's not subjected to the constraints of corporate media, has gone out of its way to ignore this scandal. It's a sad commentary on this era we're in, and it speaks to the importance of other people stepping up, and I'm glad you have, Jimmy. So
we do much better. We do much better reporting on the Trump administration, Russiagate, Syria than they'll ever do at Democracy Now! Their coverage of Russiagate was flat out garbage, and now they're completely pulling bullshit on Syria, and nobody can figure out why. Well, I'm sure if you looked at, I'm sure they picked up a donor somewhere. that doesn't want them to do this. Why would they do this? Why would she report Russiagate so unseriously?
Listen, like we've talked about this before, and we don't agree. And I get a lot of people share your point of view. I get it. I think actually Amy and the rest of the team have more integrity than that. I really do, actually. I don't think they're compromised. But listen, they've had money for a long time. It's a well-funded show, and they've earned that because they've done a lot of great work in the past. But I think now it's about how manufacturing consent works. You internalize it. If you go there, if you challenge certain narratives, you're going to be kicked out of the club. And I think there's a desire for a certain level of acceptance by the mainstream in respectable, quote unquote, liberal circles. I think that's my personal speculation what the motive is. I don't think it's money.
Whatever the motivation is, they're doing garbage work. We outdid them for
Absolutely.
5 years.
I agree with you on that, 100%.
5 years straight.
And it's crazy. It's crazy given the caliber of what the show, generally has been, and it still is on some issues. It's not all around establishment propaganda, but on these critical issues, including Russiagate and Syria, it's done the exact opposite of what its legacy is. And it's been hard for me to watch as someone who was there for 10 years and was a big part of it. I was very proud of that show. And, it's a big part of my background. Even before I worked there, I was very inspired by it. So it's sad to see this still going on.
Yeah, it's sad to see that them let themselves be turned into a shit show on purpose, consciously doing it consciously, letting a fucking pothead comedian who's drunk and high half the time outdo their reporting for 5 years straight on Russiagate. Because it doesn't take skill or smarts to do it. It just takes the courage to tell the truth, which they are woefully lacking over there. Hey everybody, we just added stand-up dates in Florida and Arizona. And we are going to be at Harlow's. We just added a second show in Sacramento, California on October 3rd. Is it the 3rd? I think so. So go to jimmydorcomedy.com for the Florida tickets, the Tempe tickets, and the Sacramento, California. See you there.